Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one's going to be for Sword Art Online Progressive Volume 5. Light novel, of course. This isn't the manga. So this is actually kind of new content, at least released in English. I believe the release date for this book is actually Monday or Tuesday, but I managed to, where I ordered from, get it early. So yeah, nice image of Kirito and Asuna on the front, and I believe that is Morte up there, because we deal with him again. Spine this time out is kind of a light, kind of vibrant green, and then on the back we get Chibi, Kirito, and Asuna with puzzles, because the floor here, floor 6, deals really heavily with puzzles. That's why you can see it says how many of these puzzles are there. Yeah, much shorter, much thinner volume this time out. We only get up to, what, 186, page 186, so it's far and away the shortest of all of the light novels for Progressive. And in fact, in the afterword, the author basically says this is a two-parter. So we don't actually even finish floor 6 in this volume. It's only half of floor 6 basically, which is a little bit of a letdown in that it's so much shorter. Yet, you know, we're going into a whole second book, and I don't think it's the most interesting floor. Like, I think reading it, it's still enjoyable. I love Progressive. It's really fun to read. And it's just so nice, especially like with Alicization on, like reading that and the light novels. The anime is on at the moment. It's really actually interesting to go back to like original Aincrad and just develop the stuff that we didn't see there a lot more. It feels so unique, and like, yeah, we're returning home, and like it's not the new stuff of Alicization, even though I love both. So that was cool, but at the same time, I think this is the first Progressive volume where I've kind of felt like, okay, there's a couple of problems here. One is just that, okay, like, come on, like, the pacing of this now just feels like all over the place. Like, we went from, like, yes, the first volume is very thick. The first volume is super thick, of course, because it covers, like, 2 floors. And it was the starter one, of course. So, you know, it is what it is. But then all of the other ones, like, are fairly, like, even in length. They're all somewhere between 250 and 240 pages, I believe. Yeah. So this is like 60 pages less than even the previous shortest one, which I believe was volume 2. And that just feels really bad, because like we have to wait so long for this. Like, as he says in the afterword in this volume, it's been 2 years. So like, even in the Japanese release, it was 2 years between volume 4 and volume 5. And it's been the same here with the English releases, in that I looked back at my review for volume 4, and that was in November 2016. So that's exactly how it is. Now, from what I looked into, there was only 3 months between volume 5 and volume 6, but I think it's going to be like 6 months here. I don't think volume 6 here is out until like May or June next year, which is pretty unfortunate, because it is a part 1 and a part 2. And obviously, I think the reason for that is that Yen Press is only using one translator on every single Sword Art Online book. So Progressive Manga, Girls Ops, Hollow Realization they've just done, Alicization, all the other manga stuff that they're doing now, Alternative Gun Gale Online, all of it is done by the same translator, and it's kind of like, whoa, like, do you have to have like the same guy doing all of it? Like, I get it's good for consistency, but like, wow, it really slows down the releases, especially when they're doing like every single side project. Whereas I think most fans, like hardcore fans, would probably prefer like prioritize the main series, of course, Alicization as it is right now, and Progressive, and then the other stuff can come afterwards. But anyway, let's get into it. The other problem I would have with this is that the first, like, I'd say 1/5 of the book feels very recappy of what just happened. Now, I think that's a bit understandable, because it was 2 years between releases. I get why he would feel the need to kind of have recap content in the book, but I feel in that case, shouldn't this book have been like a little bit longer than previously? It should have been kind of thicker, like have a kind of recap section, and then the rest of the book is like 200 pages, and have it be slightly on the longer side, but that's to account for the fact that, like, to help people so they don't have to go back and just reread 4 books just to catch up with the 5th book. Do that, but instead it takes up a decent amount at the start of the book. There is new stuff there, of course, as they kind of, you know, consider what just happened. And obviously what we're talking about here is the guild flag that Kirito has as the drop from the 5th floor boss. It being this incredibly powerful item that both the Aincrad Liberation Squad and the Dragon Knights Brigade, the 2 main guilds at this point in time, both of them really would like this item, but Kirito can't give it to one or the other because that will make that guild so much more powerful than the other one. So, as was explained in the last volume, he explained it to Kabao from the ALS that basically, I'm going to hold on to this. If you or the ALS gets another drop of this item, I'll give this one free of charge to the other guild who didn't get the guild flag. If you join up, if both of these guilds join up into one, I'll give you the guild flag right now. And they are the two, like, they're the main conditions for how Kirito will give this guild flag to any of them. And it feels a little bit recappy in part because he explains this to Asuna, like, okay, this is a recap of what we just did. Then they basically go immediately into a scene where they tell Lind, the leader of the Dragon Knights Brigade, basically exactly the same thing. And he accepts the terms, just like Kabao. They're actually fairly reasonable about it. But Lind does offer Kirito, like, I think it's 300,000 currency for the guild flag. Kirito, of course, disagrees, doesn't accept it, and that's the understanding with what happened. So there is this sense, though, with Kirito where he's kind of like, okay, look, I played the beta test up until, like, floor 10. Another guild flag didn't drop, so realistically we're not getting another one of these until, like, way past floor 10. But they still want to use this item because obviously it's a game of death and this is a hugely powerful item, but they don't want to imbalance the player base, but they kind of have to put it to use. So Kirito is trying to come up with ideas to, like, make some use of it, but in the end, the only idea that sort of, in a way, makes sense would be like if Kirito started his own guild, or Kirito and Asuna start their guild, and they kind of merge everyone together into their guild. But Kirito as a solo player doesn't want that, and at this point in time, Asuna also doesn't want that. She doesn't want to be part of a guild either. And it's interesting that she specifically mentions, like, I don't want to be the, like, sub-leader of a guild, with the idea being that she's addressing the idea that Kirito would be the guild leader, and because she's his partner at this point in time, she would by default, I suppose, be the second in command, and she doesn't want that, and it's funny that that's how it ends up going. So it's going to be interesting to see when they actually introduce the Knights of the Blood Oath, isn't it? Yeah, that's the guild that Asuna is a part of with Heathcliff. When that comes into play, and if that's who the guild flag is given to, or something else happens to the guild flag, I'm not entirely sure. But that's what most of, like, the very beginning of the book is about. Is just continuing with that whole thing. Then they get to basically addressing the whole, like, okay, we're on floor 6. The theme of this floor is puzzles. Basically, every door in the place has a puzzle on it. Even if you go to an inn, you have to solve a puzzle to get into your room. And it's basically this curse that is placed on this floor as is related to the story plot, the main quest of this floor. And they go quite in depth, actually, into this quest. Ultimately, kind of Asuna agrees that, like, okay, Kirito, just tell me what happens with this quest. I don't particularly care about the story here. You know what happens. Just tell me the spoilers for the story. And he does. So we actually get spoiled immediately what the plot of it is. And it's interesting enough. The leader of this floor was like a puzzle master. He was like the apprentice of the main puzzle master. And there's this legend that goes that this, like, traveler came around, and the traveler was, like, killed, but in the process, like, he killed the master, and then the apprentice had to take over. Turns out, though, in the end, that the guy who's the leader was actually the one who killed the master, and there was never any kind of traveler, and it's this kind of bit of conspiracy. And they basically do this quest to just get the experience. They want to level up, of course, and they end up pretty much going ahead with this. Asuna just wants to get it out of the way so they can do the next step of the Elf War quest line, because that's what she actually cares about with Kismel, of course. And yeah, like in the end, like all it really comes down to is that they go through the different steps of the quest. They kind of end up having to face some kind of ghost type monsters again, and Asuna is kind of scared, and she has to kind of learn to get past that. Along the way, though, they do upgrade their weapons at an elf camp. Kismel's not there yet. They upgrade their weapons with the kind of surly blacksmith guy who was in one of the previous volumes. And obviously Kirito at this point in time has a new sword. It's the kind of elf quest item that he got. So it's not the anneal blade anymore. And he goes for upgrades. I think he initially wants to go with his standard one, which is like, I think it's like +2 to sharpness, +1 to durability, because he has 3 upgrades. Materials for 3 upgrades. The blacksmith actually offers him advice here and says, sharpness isn't going to actually do anything, because this blade is already just by default like extremely sharp, and if you sharpen it anymore, you'll just basically make it fragile. And he says instead what you should do is actually upgrade the accuracy of this blade. That would be the best upgrade path for it. So Kirito, it basically explains to us as the audience like the technical details of how all of these stats affect swordplay, and why he goes for always sharpness and why he always goes for sharpness and durability over everything else, and not like weight and all this other sort of stuff. And that he prefers to not have as much kind of system automation in his fighting as much as possible, because he likes being fully in control. In a VR thing especially, where like you are directly delivering the strikes, he doesn't want like all this kind of system assistance like directing his blade magically. But he accepts the advice of the blacksmith in that like it's an elven weapon, it's a legendary elven weapon. Why wouldn't he accept the help of someone who knows the weapon? So he goes ahead with the double accuracy, single durability upgrade. Asuna ends up upgrading her chivalric rapier up to like +7, I think it is, or +8. And Kirito's like, it still has it still has like 5 or 6 like upgrade attempts left, because obviously the whole idea of Asuna having that weapon, it's like that weapon will last her for like so many floors because it has such a high upgrade potential. They do at this point also mention that Kirito still has a couple of those Mumu planks, which again, for just a recap, it basically is like a guaranteed upgrade. Like the upgrade won't fail if you include this as part of the materials, but he's saving that for later on. So I assume that will be a plot point that's kept open, and it'll be a way for like Kirito, when like he gets his next big weapon upgrade, how he can like immediately make it like much more powerful. So they do their upgrades. They go on this mission. This is where they take on the ghost kind of the ghost monsters as part of the quest. And then Kirito's like, okay, I'll keep the very last section of the quest a secret to you. You basically know what's going to happen, but you don't know the specifics of how it ends up like all playing out, because at this point like they've basically found like the key item, and they're just kind of like, okay, how do we basically unmask that the leader of the town is actually the one who's behind it all? And what happens is he arrives, he poisons them, and it's all part of the quest. Like Kirito's narrating this, and he's like, look, maybe I should have alerted her in that she's literally paralyzed here. They're both put in a bag together, and they're basically taken back to the town, with the idea that Kirito reveals that the quest is that he places them in this kind of locked section underneath his house, and basically forces them to solve this puzzle from his old master to try and solve the curse of puzzles on the city. That's basically the idea with the main guy, the leader of this town, is that he's hiring adventurers to solve all of the puzzles he can't, and so that's what he's doing here with this quest. But this time something different happens. The carriage stops before they get to where they're meant to. Kirito and Asuna are still poisoned, and Kirito can see out of the bag, Asuna can't, and he realizes that players have attacked basically this NPC. Cylon is his name, and it's Morte and his accomplice, this other, like, I suppose they haven't fully said it yet, but like the idea is that like this is Laughing Coffin very clearly. That's what it's meant to be, Laughing Coffin. So potentially before they're officially a guild, Laughing Coffin members. So Morte, of course, has this rivalry with Kirito early on in the game, and there's this idea that he's killing this NPC. He's monitored the progress of Kirito and Asuna's quest. He's also a beta tester, so he knows that being paralyzed becomes part of the quest. This is the perfect chance for him to player kill Kirito and Asuna if he needs to. And what ends up happening is that they save themselves, or at least give themselves the chance to be cured of the poison by basically the one thing they can do while they're poisoned is like blow and still breathe. So they blow down basically the same poison that was used on them by the NPC, and it forces Morte and his accomplice to kind of retreat back. At this point, Kirito is cured of the poison and engages the two of them in combat. And there's this kind of mystery around, like, oh, what's happening with Asuna? Is she still stuck in the bag? Is the paralysis like affecting her even longer? And she's out of just not in the fight for a long time. And Kirito's really, really skilled. He's handling this okay, but Morte is a tricky opponent because of all the different tricks he uses. And in this case, in addition to all the weapon switching thing he does with the quick switch ability, he now has these poisoned picks that he's throwing. So he kind of limits his fighting style because he's technically like dual wielding without the dual wielding skills, so he can't use any axe skills, which is what he's doing. But he's throwing these poisoned picks at Kirito, which he knows are pretty kind of dangerous. Kirito does manage to dodge most of them and engage Morte. And what happens here is that Asuna charges out of all of this. She has the gas mask that the NPC character was using, which obviously with the NPC character dead, she picks up that item, and she just hides in the poison gas for most of the fight. And then she comes out of nowhere and basically takes like half the health off Morte's accomplice, and she deals with him while Kirito deals with Morte. Prior to this, it's important to establish that I think in the last volume they addressed the whole idea of Asuna being very worried about the idea that she has to learn the technique of how to fight players. And towards the early sections of this volume, she ultimately accepts that is something I need to do, partly because she finds out from Kirito about his experiences with Morte and how much at risk he was, and so to protect herself, she learns from Kirito the key dynamics of doing player versus player combat. And she holds off this guy for a really long time. Kirito versus Morte is a fairly even battle, but what happens is the accuracy upgrade that he did earlier on comes into play. Kirito gets the advantage, and the idea here is that accuracy boosts your critical hit chance. And Kirito is kind of wondering, like, this has been the one thing with the mechanics of the game he's always been confused by, and I think no one's fully found out the answer. What is an actual critical hit in Aincrad? Like, is it just, like, the weapon zooming towards someone's critical spot, and it being helping that way in terms of, like, guidance towards the weak point, which will do more damage? Or is it actually just no matter where I hit them, there is a slight chance that it'll do more damage than usual, regardless of if it's the weak point or not? And he more or less finds out here the significance of that, because this is one of his first times using accuracy upgrades. And what happens is that I think Morte goes to block with his axe, and like Kirito knows he's going to like hit his arm, but he doesn't expect to do all that much damage. He expects to like slice his arm a bit, and that'll be fine. But this is where the critical hit thing comes into play. The accuracy, the system activates, and it moves his sword slightly towards a weaker point on his arm, and he cuts Morte's arm off. Does a lot of damage, and he's shocked by this. Because he's in the middle of a PK battle against someone he knows he's going to player kill, who's going to player kill him, he follows up with another attack, which he says he usually wouldn't, but in this case he has to. And he basically reveals that the reason he's doing this, even though he doesn't want to kill anyone, is to protect Asuna. That he kind of puts that ahead of his ideals, making sure that even if it comes to it, he will sacrifice himself to make sure that Asuna gets away. So he follows up his attack with, I think he uses like Sharp Nail, and again the accuracy thing comes into play. Morte tries to block his center with his axe, and Kirito's convinced that he's just going to slam his sword directly into the block. It'll still do a lot of damage, but it won't kill him. Instead, what happens, last second, the sword, using the accuracy system upgrade thing, swerves away from the block and goes straight into Morte's heart. And it's this really interesting thing that they kind of cut away from the fight for a second and they just focus on the emotions of like Kirito shocked, almost regretting the upgrade, like knowing that he's just dealt this like really devastating blow here, that the sword has done this kind of crazy thing again for the second time in a row. And they focus on it for like a good couple of pages of just Kirito watching Morte's health go down. It just shoots down from basically like nearly full health to like 90, 70, 50, 25, and then it starts to slow down. And they both of them just kind of stare at each other like, is this actually going to be like a near one-hit KO on a player? And they're just kind of waiting. Then Morte starts to panic and is like, pull the sword out to like his friend, who rushes over away from Asuna. They get it out eventually, and this forces Morte to retreat with the idea that he was like seconds away from being killed here. Kirito was seconds away from killing a player. And he kind of reflects on it that like, you know, he'd never considered like having to do this before, but like realizing that to protect Asuna, it was something that in the future he kind of feels he might actually be able to do. So it's a pretty notable thing just in terms of developing that part of the character, that he accepts the fact that at some point that's going to have to be something that he does. And it's this, you think he's going to be very like regretful of like, I have to get rid of this sword, I can't have this accuracy upgrade if I don't have control over the amount of damage I can do. But he he kind of accepts that like, no, this is better. It's better that Morte learned the lesson that he could be like one hit killed by me, but that I'm going to have this sword that can really, really take him out, and he's going to think twice before attacking me again. So, you know, I don't think Morte's over and done with. He'll come back. They basically say as much, that he'll probably come back with more tricks to try and player kill Kirito, but he'll be ready. And then after that, they basically just have a, you know, there's little scenes that happen along the way. They meet up with Argo for a second. Then they kind of go away. They meet up with Aegil and the rest of the guilds to do the like mid dungeon, to sort of move the quest along. It's not the labyrinth heading into the boss, but it's just that kind of mid-boss type thing, and they quickly get through that and defeat it. I think Aegil gets the last attack bonus this time round. I think they reveal what the item is, but I don't think Aegil says it's anything particularly important. He's not overly impressed by the item that he got. But either way, he was the one who got it. And pretty much after that, we just kind of move towards the end. I think at this point, Kirito and Asuna, they go to do the next section of the elf quest line. They meet up with Kisnell, and you know, it's a pretty nice moment here. Just the relationship of Kisnell with Asuna especially, but also Kirito, is just really well done. Of just this NPC character that they really, really, really care about. And again, like, what's interesting about this thing is that, let's not remember the episode from the anime, and I suppose the light novels, of at some point Asuna gets to the point where she wants to help the players progress by basically drawing an NPC out into the open to draw the fire of like monsters. That she, at some point, something happens and she doesn't feel that way about NPCs anymore. So obviously they're setting up that the big thing throughout this whole series is going to be the fact that something happens with Kirito and Asuna's relationship that causes them to split up, and there's a bit of a rift between them for a while until basically the series happens, and we get that kind of second half of the first season of the first season of the anime basically. And a lot of with the relationship with Kirito and Asuna throughout this book, of course, you get the usual teasing of, like, they're so close. You get Argo teasing Asuna about it. Kirito being a bit, like, naive about a lot of this stuff of, like, well, why are they teasing me? The Aegil's guild teases them as well, and he's kind of like, what? We're just, you know, working together, and they don't quite get it. You can tell Asuna is a little... You can tell, I think, that Asuna is older than Kirito here, which obviously is something we know, but they don't know each other's ages at this point. And it's interesting to see them, the different approach, in that like Asuna is aware of basically any time a situation looks bad in terms of them romantically, whereas Kirito only recognizes it like sometimes, and other times he just doesn't get it at all. Again, you get some of the other kind of more kind of funny teases throughout the book of you know, just things where like they're in the bag together. Of course, they're like smashed up against each other, and it's really awkward. Asuna at one point gets a status effect in the battle against the ghost monsters, where she gets like a chill status condition, and to get rid of it, Kirito basically wraps a blanket around both of them to help, obviously the blanket to help just with keeping both of them warm, but then his body heat also being to like draw it away from Asuna and so on. And that's a bit of an awkward one where like they're just kind of like, okay, we'll accept this. And then, of course, you get a classic bath scene as well, which they specifically reference afterwards, actually. Like, Kirito, like, in a way, has a lot to thank about the baths of Aincrad, in that it's kind of become this kind of key place for, like, his relationship with Asuna, just because so many, like, moments have sort of, in a way, happened because of kind of awkward moments with the bath, of just, like, that's when, like, she had a bath, like, in the room, and, like, Kirito was there, but then Argo burst in, and there was an incident there. Other scenes with Kismel, and then this one here, where they're in the forest elf castle of this area, and they go to have a bath, and they're really worried about it because they're always like, you know, is it a public bath or what? And Kismel says there are male and female entrances to the bath, and I think Kirito and Asuna both take this to be like, okay, so they're separate. So Kirito goes in, gets changed, goes in, Kismel and Asuna obviously go off together. He walks in, and just as he takes his towel off, he just looks around, and like there's like Asuna standing like naked in front of him. And it's just like, I've made a horrible mistake. And they kind of tease it beforehand of just like, the mistake I made was like irreversible. And what happens is that Asuna is actually really annoyed this time and goes to like punch him. But the punch Kirito senses is not just a "you've annoyed me" punch. It's an actual like, I will do damage. Asuna will potentially turn into a orange player if she hits me like this, because obviously the two of them are naked at this point in time, so that it will actually do a decent amount of damage because there's no like defensive resistance here. So Kirito's like, to save Asuna from becoming an orange player, he basically tackles her. Like, he avoids the punch by like tackling her into the water, but obviously they're both naked, so it's super awkward. And that's when Kismel walks in, and it's just like, my, you two are getting pretty friendly, aren't you? So it's this incredibly awkward moment for the two of them, and just this kind of the incidents that seem to happen in baths with Kirito and Asuna, especially when Kismel's around. A fun scene, and just a funny thing that keeps happening, I suppose, to them. But yeah, the book basically ends with, like, again, with another kind of interesting moment. Like, every inn that they've gone to, they've made sure to have, like, separate rooms, separate beds, or if they have to have one room, to make sure it's a double, the room has 2 beds in it. But they have to stay at the elf castle this time out, but they only have a room that has 1 giant bed. So they have to accept the fact that, okay, they both have to sleep in the same bed, but Asuna does the thing of, like, this is the line, don't cross it. But then when they're talking, they kind of discuss, like, wait, actually, when you tackled me in the bath, like, why didn't the harassment code go off? Like, it went off previously when you, like, like, touched me when something was going on, and we both didn't know why it happened there, but yet we were both, like, naked here, and you, like, tackled me. Like, why didn't it go off there? And they're kind of wondering, like, was it because you were asleep the first time, but they don't really buy that? So they sort of test it by basically, they're both asleep in the same bed, and they both like pinky hold each other is what they do, like hold each other's pinkies while they're asleep, with the idea that when they wake up, the harassment code should be going off if they're both asleep and kind of touching each other. But I suppose what they're potentially getting at here is something like that, this is like, what's the way to word this? That the harassment code doesn't work when the 2 characters are naked, because obviously we know that, like, it's from that, like, obviously chapter, the infamous chapter of, like, where Kirito and Asuna have sex, of course, but they're basically sort of, I think, implying that the answer to this is that the reason it didn't go off is because they were both naked and they're both in the party together, so the game potentially thought they were, going to get intimate or something like that. I'm not sure if that's what it was going to for, but that's where my mind went, and it felt like that was the only answer to it. Like, it has been something that they've set up throughout the last couple of volumes, that they've mentioned, like, trying to figure out what does and what does not trigger the harassment code, and like, I suppose is it maybe it's just leading up to the, like, murder in the safe zone stuff and the whole, like, sleep PK situation that comes into play later on. Is it just leading up to that? I'm not sure. I do think it is meant to be something more like that, but they're making a notable enough deal about it. But still, it's interesting. In terms of, I suppose, more meaningful stuff with the Kirito Asuna relationship, I'd say the main thing is that Kirito constantly mentions that, like, oh yeah, I'll stick with you until I feel you're strong enough to be on your own. And kind of Asuna kind of confronts him about this and just says, do you want to be in a partnership with me? Yes. And like this combined with, like, stuff from the previous volumes of just, like, Argo talking to, like, Asuna about Kirito and so on, it's getting across that she is beginning to really, really like and accept this kind of partnership, and them actually getting quite close. Kirito is, I think, still kind of trying to put this kind of barrier up of, like, he's staying with her until she can get to the point where she can be this player that he feels that she can be. He really feels that she can become the leader of the guild if she needs to. That he kind of constantly sees his own weaknesses, that I can't take on that role. As much as everyone thinks I'm skilled enough to, I just can't do that. That is not something I'm capable of doing. But I'll turn you into the player who can do that. And I think that's an interesting thing constantly going throughout, and that Asuna ultimately doesn't want that. She likes being around Kirito. But I think there's also this slight worry from Kirito that when they get past floor 10, he suddenly doesn't have any extra knowledge about the game. Suddenly his beta test knowledge goes away. And he's kind of, I think he's almost thinking of, like, at that point, like, is our relationship the same as it has always been, or what? Because will she want to stick around me when I'm not as useful before? Of course, we know from Asuna's perspective that she's not like that, but he's, I suppose, still thinking that, in a way, part of why she's sticking around him is that there is meant to be this sort of teacher-student dynamic between them. We, of course, get the sense it's actually developing much more into romantic. Like, basically everyone who sees them together can really see that it is borderline romantic between the two of them. So something's going to happen at some point. I get the sense that Asuna is going to become frustrated with the fact that Kirito ultimately deep down still has this opinion of, at some point, he's going to have to, like, move away from her to let her become the player that she needs to be for the player base, the player he can't be because of the whole beater situation. And it's weird because I think the guilds are ultimately at this point beginning to sort of accept that he's not that character that, like, the first volume maybe, like, made him out to be, but he deep down feels that, like, part of it is true. It's a really interesting dynamic for the character, because we know he has to go through, like, so much, like, on his own, and so on. The whole Moonlit Black Cat situation has to happen, of him joining a guild, it falling apart, them getting killed, and him blaming himself, and that being the thing that when he's on his own, he works himself to the bone after that, and just levels up. That's when he truly, like, accelerates and becomes, like, above all, completely, by a mile, the most powerful player in the game. Because already you get the impression that Kirito and Asuna are probably the two most, like, highly leveled and experienced players in the game at this point. But there are other players who are probably close enough to them. But, like, that moment is kind of what puts Kirito above everyone else. That moment on his own where he's just so driven to never let anything like that happen again. And that happens when he's on his own. So yeah, I'm really interested to see where they go with this. The problem I think is ultimately just the pacing of like, there's multiple years at times between these books. We're only halfway through floor 6. This is the first time we're taking multiple volumes to do a floor. And I think we're still a good bit away from like potentially skipping a floor because it's something we already know about. I know there's a bunch of references to like certain floors and stuff that happens. Like I assume floor 10 is going to be a very significant one that they're going to focus on for a while. That being the floor the beta testers never passed, and Kirito already kind of teasing the fact that it's going to be this really dreadful thing, because even the base monsters in the labyrinth, which have never been too much of a problem up to now, they're suddenly going to become a huge thing, and then he doesn't even know what the boss is. So I assume we'll begin to get to that point, and that's going to be a very interesting thing for Kirito, to see him go from being, I know lots of stuff because I'm the beta tester, to have to kind of transition to being that frontline player who's kind of discovering everything and still trying to be as best as he can be. So yeah, that's most of what I want to say about Progressive Volume 5. I'd still recommend it, like, to anyone who likes the series. Like, it's got most of the main traits that you expect from the series. It's just, I think, the weaknesses of it being shorter than everything else. It being the first time a floor is going to take 2 volumes. And just the amount of waiting. Like, it was 2 years for this. And now in the English kind of situation, we're going to be waiting like even longer than Japan were for the next volume. Like, it'd be fine if the next volume was out in 3 months, but it looks like it's going to be much longer than that. And it's understandable, you know, they don't have as many translators to do all this stuff. It's just very frustrating when, like, we wait 2 years and you get a book that you can read in like 2 hours, and you're waiting 6 months for the next one. So that would be cool if it was fixed, but it is what it is. So yeah, it's still fun. As I said, just it being shorter, first part of the first 2-parter. The first little section of it feeling very recap-y, of just like, okay, you've basically just gone to the other guild to tell them the exact same thing you told the other guild. The stuff with Morte, I think, was definitely the best in this book, of just continuing that rivalry. One other thing I should mention here, I forgot to mention this, that they're sort of presenting a plot point of Kirito and Asuna beginning to investigate the poison that both the picks that Morte used and then the dagger that the other guy was using, and how powerful it is. Because when they investigate it, like, they go to Kismel and they're like, okay, look, this is like weaponry from the other side of the Elf War quest. This poison is really high level right now on these early floors. Basically, there's nothing you can do to kind of just get rid of a debuff like that. You just have to hope it wears off in time before your health goes out. So it's becoming this sort of plot point, I think, heading into the next one, that Kirito and Asuna are going to do this section of the Elf War campaign to try and develop a item that can counteract the poison from the other side of the quest. I just thought it was an interesting little dynamic of, like, they make a really clear point how dangerous these types of poisons are, and how if player killing starts to become an even bigger thing, people could start to go down. Lots of people could start to go down with all this poison going around. So they have to try and stop this. I like it. It feels like this kind of early section of, like, Kirito and Asuna detective team, like the murder in the safe zone kind of situation that comes up later on. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Progressive Volume 5. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the volume if you've read it. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.